Get rid of it. I have written a check. The amount should cover everything and leave you comfortable enough to relocate somewhere far from here. The words hung in the air of the corner office, suspended above the city lights that sparkled 40 floors below like scattered diamonds, mocking the woman who stood frozen before the mahogany desk. Nora Tierney had rehearsed this moment for 3 days. She had practiced in front of her bathroom mirror, imagining surprise melting into joy, perhaps even tears. She had pictured Victor crossing the room to hold her, to whisper that this changed everything, that now they had a reason to stop pretending their 8 months together meant nothing. Instead, he had not even looked up from the documents on his desk when she told him. He had simply opened a drawer, removed a checkbook, and written figures that were supposed to erase what was growing inside her. Victor, I thought you would want to know. I thought after everything we talked about, all those nights when you said you were tired of living for everyone else, that maybe this could be different. He finally raised his eyes then, and she saw a stranger looking back at her. Gone was the man who traced her jawline in darkness and whispered about escape, about building something real away from the expectations that suffocated him. This was Victor Renault, heir to Renault Maritime, the son who had been groomed since childhood to value legacy over love and profit over people. You thought wrong. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell where you're watching from and what time it is where you're at. If you're new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. Victor moved papers that did not need moving, his hands precise and controlled, as though organizing quarterly reports rather than dismantling a future that had never existed outside of Nora's imagination. I have responsibilities. My father's health is failing. The merger with Montclair Shipping depends on my engagement to Genevieve. The board expects stability, not scandal. Scandal. Nora repeated the word, and it tasted like something that had spoiled in her mouth. That is what this is to you. That is what I am. Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Do not make this emotional. We were always clear about what this was. I never promised you anything permanent. The lie hung between them so obvious that Nora almost laughed. She remembered every promise, every whispered confession, every moment he had pretended to be someone capable of choosing love over duty. For 8 months she had believed the performance. She had mistaken his temporary rebellion for permanent transformation. You told me you loved me. Her voice cracked on the word, and she hated herself for the weakness. 2 weeks ago in that hotel room you said you could not imagine your life without me. I said what you needed to hear. Victor's words were surgical, designed to cut clean and leave no ragged edges to dispute later. You are beautiful, Nora. You made me feel alive for a while. But this was never going to end any other way. I am marrying Genevieve in 6 months. The contracts are signed. The announcements are scheduled. This child would complicate everything. This child. Nora stood and her legs barely supported her weight. You keep saying this like it is an object. A problem to be managed. There is a heartbeat inside me. Victor. There is life. There is a complication. He picked up the check and held it toward her like a business transaction requiring signature. Take the money and handle this before it becomes something neither of us can control. You are young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Do not throw it away on a mistake. The cruelty of his dismissal finally penetrated through her shock and ignited something fierce in her chest. Nora looked at this man she had loved, really looked at him, and saw the truth she had been avoiding since the beginning. He had never been hers. He had never been real. Everything between them had been borrowed time, stolen moments between the life he was required to live and the person he pretended to be when no one was watching. I am not doing this for you. She left the check on the desk, her voice steady now despite the earthquake happening inside her skull. Whatever happens next is my choice. My life. My future. Victor's expression flickered with something that might have been regret before the mask settled back into place. You have 2 days to reconsider. After that I will have my lawyers contact you with a formal agreement. Take the help, Nora. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. The only thing hard here is understanding how I ever thought you were capable of loving anyone. Nora grabbed her purse, her movements deliberate despite the chaos screaming through her nervous system. You are going to regret this, Victor. Not because I will make you pay. but because one day you will wake up and realize you traded everything real for a life that was always a performance. Get out. His voice was cold now, all pretense of civility abandoned like something that had served its purpose and could be discarded. Get out before I call security. Nora walked to the elevator on legs that felt disconnected from her body. Her heels clicked against marble floors that had once seemed magical back when she was foolish enough to believe fairy tales could survive in towers made of glass and steel and cold ambition. The doors closed on Victor's silhouette, still standing at that window, still choosing the city over her, still proving that some men were raised to destroy rather than to build. The lobby was empty at this hour. Just the night security guard who nodded at her politely, unaware that her entire world had just shattered 40 stories above his head. Nora pushed through the revolving doors into the night air. Rain was beginning to fall in sheets, soaking through her coat before she had taken 3 steps. She walked for blocks, maybe miles. She was barely aware of direction or destination. Her mind replayed every moment and every lie and every promise that had been calculated manipulation dressed up as intimacy. The pregnancy test in her purse felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. This tiny piece of plastic that had revealed not just new life but the truth about the man she had loved. Finally, Nora stopped on a corner with rain plastering her hair to her face and mascara running in dark rivers down her cheeks. She pressed both hands against her stomach, feeling nothing yet but knowing everything was different now. Victor had given her a choice, thinking he was being generous, thinking his money could erase consequences and make problems disappear the way his family had always made problems disappear. But Nora had already made her choice the moment she saw those 2 pink lines. She chose life over convenience. She chose love over money. She chose the unknown over the easy lie. We are going to survive this. She whispered it to the life growing inside her, her voice fierce despite the tears mixing with rain on her face. I do not know how, but we will. And one day he is going to see what he threw away. And it will break him in ways he cannot imagine. The rain fell harder, washing away the last traces of the woman who had walked into that penthouse office hoping for joy and finding devastation instead. Someone new was emerging from the wreckage. Someone stronger. Someone who understood now that the hardest choices were often the only real ones. Nora disappeared the way smoke disappears. Gradually at first and then all at once, leaving behind everything that connected her to Victor Renault's world. The luxury apartment he had been paying for sat empty within a week. Her key rested on the counter with no note and no forwarding address. Just absence where a person used to be. Her resignation arrived at the publishing house by email. Professional and cold, giving them nothing to question and nothing to follow up on. Friends who knew her as the woman Victor Renault occasionally appeared with in public found her number disconnected and her social media accounts deleted. Her entire digital footprint erased like she had never existed at all. Victor received the first report 3 days after their confrontation. She was gone. Completely gone. His investigators could find no trace of where she had relocated or what name she might be using now. He told himself this was better. Cleaner. She had finally understood the reality of the situation and made the sensible choice. He could move forward with the Montclair merger and his engagement to Genevieve without this complication hovering at the edges of his carefully constructed life. He did not examine why her disappearance unsettled him. He did not ask himself why he kept looking at his phone expecting a message that never came. He simply closed that drawer in his mind the way he had been taught to close all drawers that contained inconvenient emotions. The bus ride took 9 hours, winding through landscapes that transformed from urban sprawl to rural beauty as Massachusetts became New Hampshire became Maine. Nora pressed her forehead against the window, watching towns blur past and feeling like she was shedding a skin, becoming someone new out of necessity rather than choice. Her phone buzzed repeatedly during the first hour. Victor's name flashed across the screen until she finally turned it off and dropped it into a trash can at a rest stop. Whatever he wanted to say now, whatever excuses or threats or final payments he wanted to offer, she did not want to hear them. Her aunt's house appeared exactly as Nora remembered from childhood visits. A small cottage 3 blocks from the ocean with weathered blue paint and a garden that grew wild with herbs and flowers that had been there longer than Nora had been alive. Ida Tierney stood on the porch before Nora even knocked. As if some instinct had warned her that family was coming home broken and in need of shelter. "Child, get in here before you collapse." Ida pulled Nora inside with hands that were strong and warm and smelled like the rosemary she grew in clay pots on the windowsills. "You look like death decided to take a walk and forgot to lie down." Nora meant to explain. She meant to find words that would make sense of the catastrophe that her life had become in the span of a single conversation. But instead she crumbled, her body folding into her aunt's arms with sobs tearing through her chest like they would split her open and leave nothing but grief behind. Ida held her through it, making soft sounds that were not quite words. The same sound she had made when Nora was small and her father left and the world first taught her that men could abandon the people they claimed to love without warning or explanation. The guest room became Nora's sanctuary. A small space with faded wallpaper showing roses that had yellowed with age and a bed that creaked but felt safer than anywhere she had slept in months. That first night lying in darkness with ocean sounds drifting through the open window, Nora let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. Victor's betrayal was not just about the pregnancy. It was about discovering that the person she loved had never actually existed. That every moment of intimacy had been theater. That she had been so desperate to believe in love that she ignored every warning sign because the alternative was admitting she was alone in a world that kept proving loneliness was her natural state. 3 weeks later, Nora lay on an examination table with cold gel on her stomach and watched the ultrasound screen with detached curiosity that masked the terror underneath. The technician's face changed. Her expression shifted from routine to surprised, and Nora's heart dropped into her stomach. "Is something wrong?" The words came out small and terrified and nothing like the strong woman she was trying to become. "Wrong. No, honey. Everything is perfect." The technician turned the screen and pointed to 3 distinct shapes. 3 separate heartbeats pulsing in rhythm like a small orchestra playing a song only they could hear. "You are having triplets. 3 healthy babies all developing beautifully." Nora stared at the screen, unable to process what she was seeing. 3 lives. 3 futures. 3 souls that Victor had wanted her to erase with a check and a cold command. The magnitude of it crashed over her. Not just the practical impossibility of raising 3 children alone on an income that barely covered necessities, but the cosmic absurdity of it all. Of course her body would do something extraordinary. Of course nothing about this would be simple or easy or anything like she expected. "Are you okay?" The technician's voice was gentle with genuine concern. "I know triplets can be overwhelming news." "I am okay." Nora heard herself say the words though she had no idea if they were true. "I am going to be okay." That night she sat across from Ida at the kitchen table and delivered the news with a calm she did not feel. "Triplets." Ida set down her tea cup carefully. "Well, I was expecting 1 baby and that seemed like plenty. 3 is going to require some adjustments. I understand if this is too much." Nora's voice wavered despite her attempts to control it. "I can figure something else out. I can find a place and make it work somehow." "Stop that nonsense right now." Ida's hand covered hers with firm warmth. "You are my sister's only child and these babies are my family. We will need more diapers than I calculated and probably less sleep than either of us prefers. But we will manage. We always manage." The pregnancy was brutal in ways Nora had not anticipated. Her body stretched and ached with exhaustion, settling into her bones like permanent weight that would never fully lift. Morning sickness lasted all day every day for months. Simple tasks like climbing stairs or putting on shoes became monumental efforts that left her gasping and frustrated and sometimes crying from sheer overwhelm. Ida worked double shifts at the care facility in town. Coming home exhausted but always ready to help Nora through another crisis, another panic attack, another moment when the impossibility of everything threatened to drown her completely. Nora enrolled in online classes for editing and proofreading. Determined to build skills that could support her family, determined to become someone who did not need rescue or charity or handouts from anyone. Late at night when the babies kicked and rolled inside her, she worked on assignments, teaching herself software and techniques, building knowledge from nothing while her body built 3 humans from nothing. The work gave her purpose beyond survival. It reminded her that she was still capable of creating something meaningful even in the midst of chaos. She talked to them constantly. These 3 lives sharing her body. She told them stories about the ocean and about her grandmother who taught her that strength was not something you found but something you decided to be every single morning when you opened your eyes. She never mentioned their father, as if silence could erase him from their story. Though sometimes she woke from dreams where Victor was there watching her belly grow, his face twisted with emotions she refused to name. The labor came early. 7 months into the pregnancy, her body decided that was long enough to carry 3. Nora was terrified as they rushed her to the hospital. Ida holding her hand and talking her through contractions that felt like her body was tearing itself apart from the inside. The world blurred into pain and panic and bright lights. Voices telling her to push, to breathe, to hold on just a little longer. Everything happening too fast and too slow at the same time. Then the first cry pierced through everything. Sharp and indignant and perfect. Then the second. Softer but just as insistent. Then the third. A wail that sounded like fury at being forced into the cold world without permission or preparation. They placed 3 tiny humans on Nora's chest. Warm and wet and impossibly real, and nothing else in the universe mattered anymore. What are their names? A nurse hovered nearby with a clipboard ready. Nora looked down at 3 perfect faces. 3 lives she had chosen. 3 souls that were hers to protect and love and raise into people who would know they were wanted every single day. Owen. She touched the first baby's dark curls. He had cried the loudest, and she knew already he would be the one who faced the world head-on. Maeve. She whispered to the quiet one with serious eyes that seemed to be studying the ceiling as though committing it to memory. And Finn. She smiled at the smallest, who was still crying like he had opinions about this whole situation and intended to express them fully. Irish names. Connecting them to her heritage and her grandmother and the people who came before. Not connecting them to him. Not connecting them to anything that could be taken away. The first year passed in a blur of sleepless nights and constant needs. 3 infants with different temperaments requiring different approaches at different times. The chaos was relentless and beautiful and exhausting beyond anything Nora could have imagined. Owen was demanding and loud. Letting the world know immediately and without apology when he was unhappy about anything. He required firmness and logic even at 6 months old, responding better to calm explanations than to soothing nonsense. Maeve was watchful and calm, almost eerily self-sufficient for an infant. She could entertain herself for longer stretches than her brothers and seemed to be processing the world through observation rather than participation. Finn was sensitive and clingy, needing constant reassurance that he was safe and loved, crying when his siblings cried as though their distress was his own personal emergency. Nora learned to function on fragments of sleep. She learned to feed 3 babies while barely conscious. She learned to somehow keep everyone alive when she felt like she was dying herself. Ida became her lifeline, teaching her how to manage chaos and how to find moments of joy buried inside the exhaustion. How to remember that this impossible situation was also a miracle that most people never experienced. They developed routines and systems. Ways to survive each day and then the next and then the next after that. Nora's editing and proofreading business grew slowly through word of mouth. Clients who appreciated her careful attention to detail and her reliability despite the chaos of her personal life. Her income improved from barely surviving to modestly comfortable. By the time the triplets turned 1, Nora had transformed into someone she barely recognized when she looked in the mirror. Thinner but stronger. Exhausted but capable. The naive woman who had loved Victor Renault had been burned away completely, replaced by a mother who had survived what should have destroyed her. She rarely thought about him anymore. She had trained herself to stop wondering if he ever regretted his choice or if he ever thought about what he had thrown away. The anger had cooled into something else over those months. Not forgiveness. Never forgiveness. But absence. An empty space where he used to live in her thoughts. She had evicted him completely because there was no room for ghosts when 3 living children required every ounce of her attention. During those same months Victor Renault lived the life he had chosen. The wedding to Genevieve Montclair was everything the society pages hoped it would be. A merger of fortunes wrapped in white satin and expensive flowers and vows that meant nothing to either person speaking them. The photographs were beautiful. The coverage was extensive. The families were satisfied. Victor and Genevieve maintained separate bedrooms within 6 months. They had discussed this arrangement before the wedding and agreed it was most practical. She had her art curation career to focus on. He had Renault Maritime to expand. They would come together for public appearances and business discussions, and occasionally for the intimate requirements that might produce an heir. Except that Genevieve had made clear before the contracts were signed that she had no interest in motherhood. Her ambitions centered on building her own legacy in the art world. Children would interfere with gallery openings and international travel and the life she had designed for herself. Victor had accepted this condition with relief that confused him at the time. He did not want children. He had never wanted children. The complication with Nora had proven that clearly enough. Renault Maritime expanded under his leadership. International markets opened. Awards accumulated on shelves in his office. Magazine profiles celebrated his vision and his ruthlessness and his ability to see opportunities others missed. His father observed these achievements with the closest thing to approval Victor had ever received from him. The old man's health was failing as predicted, but he lived long enough to see his son secure the family legacy for another generation. Victor buried himself in work, in strategy and acquisition and the comfortable language of contracts and negotiations. He understood this world. He knew its rules. He knew exactly what was expected and exactly how to deliver it. The void appeared gradually. A hollow feeling in his chest that he first attributed to stress and then to exhaustion and then to the natural consequence of the relentless schedule he maintained. He could not name what was missing. He only knew that something was. Some essential component had been removed from his internal machinery, and he kept functioning anyway because functioning was all he knew how to do. Genevieve noticed nothing because there was nothing between them to notice. They existed in parallel rather than together. Two people sharing an address and a public narrative without sharing anything that actually mattered. His mother Colette noticed. She visited the penthouse one evening and observed the empty spaces that expensive furniture could not fill. "You look tired." She said it carefully, the way she said most things carefully around her son. "I am fine." Victor did not look up from the documents he was reviewing. "That was not what I said." He raised his eyes then and saw concern in her face that he did not know how to address. His mother had always been a quiet presence in his life. Present but muted. Observing but rarely intervening. She had learned long ago that challenging his father's approach to parenting resulted in consequences she preferred to avoid. "I am managing a significant expansion." Victor returned his attention to the papers. "Fatigue is expected." Colette was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice held something he could not identify. "Your father built an empire. He did it by sacrificing everything that was not the empire. His health. His relationships. His capacity for joy. He will die having accumulated enormous wealth and having experienced almost no happiness." Victor set down his pen. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I am not suggesting anything. I am observing. You are following his path exactly. I am simply wondering if that is what you actually want or if it is simply what you were taught to want." She left before he could respond. Victor sat alone in his beautiful empty penthouse and tried to dismiss her words as the sentimentality of a woman who had never understood the requirements of maintaining legacy. But something about them lodged in his chest beside the hollow feeling that was already there. Another piece of debris floating in the void. He did not think about Nora. He had successfully trained himself not to think about her. But sometimes in the moments before sleep he would remember the way she looked at him like he was worth something beyond his name and his net worth and his usefulness. He would push those memories away because they served no purpose. She was gone. The complication had been handled. The path forward was clear. This was what he told himself. This was what he believed. 3 years passed like weather. Seasons changing without announcing themselves. Time accumulating without anyone counting it. The triplets grew into whole people with distinct personalities that filled every corner of Nora's life with chaos and laughter and love so fierce it sometimes frightened her. Owen at 3 was exactly who he had promised to be at birth. Fierce and protective, always stepping between his siblings and anything that frightened them. His confidence sometimes bordered on bossiness, but underneath it was a heart that could not bear seeing his brother or sister in distress. Maeve had become the observer Nora predicted. Quiet and watchful, seeing things other children missed. Her drawings already showed talent that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her 3 years of experience. She would sit for hours creating patterns and pictures while her brothers ran in circles around her. Finn remained the tender one. He cried at sad stories and collected treasures from the beach and gave hugs that felt like he was trying to merge souls with the person he was holding. He needed more reassurance than his siblings but gave more affection in return. Nora's editing business had grown beyond what she could manage alone. She hired occasional help for larger projects and built a reputation for quality work and reliable delivery. Clients recommended her to other clients, and the income improved from modest to comfortable. She had built a life from the wreckage of the one Victor had burned down. She had survived what should have destroyed her and created beauty from betrayal. Ida remained her constant. Working at the care facility, coming home to help with bedtime routines, offering the practical wisdom of someone who had lived long enough to know that most problems eventually resolve themselves if you just kept moving forward. The past had become a story Nora rarely told. Not because it still hurt, though sometimes it did, but because it seemed irrelevant to the present. The woman who loved Victor Renault had died in a rainstorm outside his office building. The woman who raised Owen and Maeve and Finn was someone entirely different. Then the email arrived. An invitation to an editing conference in Boston. A major event featuring publishers and authors and opportunities that could transform her small business into something more substantial. Nora stared at the screen with her cursor hovering over the delete button. She knew that going back meant facing a city full of ghosts. It meant risking the peace she had fought so hard to build. But she had 3 children who deserved more than survival. They deserved a mother who chased opportunities instead of hiding from the past. She hit accept. The preparation took weeks. Finding appropriate clothes for professional settings. Coordinating childcare with Ida. Practicing her pitch for potential clients until the words felt natural instead of rehearsed. The triplets did not understand why Mama was leaving. Owen demanded to know who would protect them while she was gone. Maeve wanted assurance that she would come back. Finn simply cried and clung to her legs until the moment she walked out the door. Ida practically pushed her onto the bus. You need this. They need you to need this. Go remember who you are besides their mother. That woman still exists somewhere under all the Cheerios and laundry. Boston looked different when Nora arrived. Or perhaps she was the one who had changed and the city was just different through her new eyes. The buildings that had seemed magical when she was young and in love now looked like ordinary structures housing ordinary people making ordinary decisions. She checked into a hotel in the Arts District, deliberately far from the financial towers where Victor lived his separate life. The room was quiet in a way that felt strange after 3 years of constant noise. She unpacked slowly, missing the chaos, missing the small hands and loud voices and the demands that she had come to understand as love expressed in its purest form. The conference began the next morning. Hundreds of professionals in a convention center, networking and exchanging cards and competing for attention in ways that made Nora feel like an imposter wearing borrowed confidence. But she pushed through the discomfort. She forced herself to approach strangers and pitch her services. She smiled until her face ached and talked until her voice grew hoarse. By the second day, she had found her rhythm. The work she had done for 3 years spoke for itself. Clients appreciated her perspective, her attention to detail, her understanding that words mattered and deserved care. A publisher named Margaret Chen stopped at her display table and actually looked at her portfolio. Not the polite glance most people offered but genuine attention, studying each sample and asking questions that showed real interest. This is excellent work. Margaret pulled out a business card. I have 3 manuscripts that need developmental editing. The current editors are backed up for months. Would you be interested in discussing a contract? Nora's heart raced as she recognized the door opening in front of her. Yes, absolutely. I would be very interested. They talked for 2 hours, the conversation evolving from business to personal. Margaret shared her own story of building a publishing career while raising children alone after her husband died young. She told Nora that talent was common but perseverance was rare. And Nora clearly had both. By the time they parted, Nora had a handshake agreement that would pay more than she had earned in the entire previous year. Validation that she was actually good at this. That she could build a career instead of just surviving. Walking back to her hotel that evening, Nora felt something shift inside her chest. A recognition that she had not just survived but was actually beginning to thrive. The street was crowded with people heading to restaurants and bars. The city alive with possibility in a way she had not allowed herself to notice in years. She was so lost in thought that she did not see the commotion ahead until she was almost through it. Cameras flashed. Security guards created a perimeter around a restaurant entrance. Expensive cars lined the curb waiting for their expensive owners. Then she heard his voice. That familiar cadence that still occasionally surfaced in dreams she refused to remember when she woke. Victor Renault stood outside the restaurant surrounded by men in expensive suits. Their laughter sharp and exclusive, celebrating something that probably involved millions of dollars and decisions that affected thousands of lives. He looked older. Harder. His dark hair was touched with gray at the temples in a way that somehow made him more distinguished instead of aging him. The suit he wore probably cost more than Nora's rent. His watch caught light like a small sun strapped to his wrist. This was his world. Power and privilege and casual wealth so enormous it distorted everything around it. Nora was suddenly aware of her second-hand dress. Her sensible shoes. The distance between their universes measured in everything that could not be bought and everything that had been taken. She should have kept walking. She should have disappeared into the crowd before he noticed her presence. But Ida had wanted the children to have a city adventure. They had taken the bus together that morning, planning to meet Nora for dinner. And now they were walking toward her from the opposite direction. 3 small figures holding Ida's hands, their voices carrying over the crowd noise as they spotted their mother. Mama. Finn broke free and ran toward her with the abandon of a 3-year-old who had not seen his favorite person in 4 whole hours. Nora caught him automatically, lifting him onto her hip as Owen and Maeve arrived with Ida close behind. We saw boats. Owen announced this loudly, unconcerned with the fancy people nearby. Big boats with sails. Aunt Ida said we can go on one tomorrow if we behave. I drew pictures of them. Maeve held up a small sketchbook with crayon drawings that showed remarkable understanding of perspective for someone her age. Nora was responding to them when she felt it. The weight of attention from across the sidewalk. Eyes fixed on her with intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. She looked up. Victor had frozen mid-sentence. His glass suspended halfway to his lips. His face draining of color as his gaze moved from her to the children clustered around her legs. 3 children. Approximately 3 years old. 2 with dark hair like his. 1 with auburn like hers. All 3 with features that would be familiar to anyone who knew what to look for. She watched recognition crash over him in waves. The math completing itself behind his eyes. The understanding arriving like a physical blow that knocked the air from his lungs. His mouth opened but no sound emerged. The men around him continued talking, unaware that an earthquake was happening inside their colleague's skull. Unaware that the carefully constructed life of Victor Renault had just developed cracks that would never fully seal. For a long moment neither he nor Nora moved. Caught in the gravity of their shared history. Connected across 20 feet of crowded sidewalk by 3 small lives that existed because she had refused to let fear make her decisions. Nora could see questions forming in his expression. Calculations about what to say and how to approach and whether his associates were watching. The machinery of his mind working to process this information and determine the appropriate response. Before he could find words, before he could shatter the piece she had spent 3 years building, Nora turned away. She gathered Finn closer on her hip. She took Owen's hand with her free one. She nodded for Ida to take Maeve. And she walked away. She did not run. She refused to give him that satisfaction. She moved with deliberate purpose, her posture straight despite the panic flooding her system. 1 block and then another. The children asking questions she could not process. Ida keeping pace beside her without asking for explanations. 3 blocks from the restaurant she turned into an alley and collapsed against the brick wall. Her breathing came in gasps like she had been drowning and only now reached the surface. Mama, are you okay? Owen's voice was small and frightened. He had never seen her like this. I am fine, sweetheart. Nora forced the words out through a throat that felt like it was closing. I just need a minute. Just 1 minute. Ida took all 3 children a few steps away, distracting them with questions about the boats they had seen, giving Nora space to fall apart without an audience. She pressed her hands against the cold brick and tried to stop shaking. 3 years of careful construction. 3 years of building a life that did not include him. 3 years of teaching herself that the past was dead and could not touch her. And in 30 seconds it had all come crashing down. He knew now. He had seen them. He had done the math and reached the only possible conclusion. Victor Renault knew he had children. 3 children. Children who did not know his name and had never seen his face and had no idea that the stranger staring at them on the sidewalk was the reason their mother sometimes went quiet for no visible reason. Nora did not know what would happen next. She did not know if he would try to find them or if his lawyers would appear with demands or if his money would somehow reach into her small careful life and tear it apart. She only knew that everything had changed. Again. Without warning. Without her permission. And this time she had 3 small people depending on her to figure out what to do about it. She pushed off the wall and straightened her spine. She wiped her face and forced her expression into something approximating calm. She walked back to where Ida waited with the children and took Owen and Finn's hands in hers. Let us go have dinner. Her voice was steady even if nothing else was. We have a lot to celebrate. Mama had a very good day at the conference. The children cheered, already forgetting the strange moment on the sidewalk, already moving on to the next thing because that was what children did. They lived entirely in the present because the past and future were concepts too large for their small perfect minds. Nora walked them toward the restaurant Ida had chosen, her back straight and her grip firm on their hands. Behind her somewhere in the city, Victor Renault stood frozen on a sidewalk while the world continued around him unchanged. His associates were asking if he was ill. His drink was warming in his motionless hand. His mind was replaying those three faces over and over, finding himself in their features, understanding finally and completely what he had thrown away with a check and a cold command spoken in a corner office 3 years and a lifetime ago. The distance between them was 20 blocks and 3 years, and a choice that could never be unmade. But for the first time since that night in the rain, Nora was not the one standing alone wondering what happened next. Now he was the one who would have to live with the not knowing. Now he was the one left behind. Victor Renault did not sleep that night. He stood at the window of his penthouse watching the city lights blur and sharpen as his eyes refused to focus on anything except the images burned into his memory. 3 faces. 3 small perfect faces that carried pieces of his own features arranged in combinations he had never imagined. Dark curls on the boy who had announced something about boats with such confidence. Serious eyes on the girl clutching a sketchbook like it contained secrets. Auburn hair on the smallest one, the one Nora had lifted onto her hip with the automatic grace of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. Triplets. 3 children. Not the single complication he had tried to erase with a check and cold words, but 3 entire human beings who existed in the world because Nora had refused to let him make her decision for her. The math was undeniable. The timing was exact. The features were his own reflected back through the filter of her genetics, and 3 years of growth he had missed entirely. His phone sat on the desk behind him, containing contacts for lawyers and investigators and fixers who could find anyone anywhere for the right price. He had used them before for business purposes. Tracking competitors. Locating assets. Gathering information that provided leverage in negotiations. He could use them now. He could have a full report on Nora Tierney within 48 hours. Her address, her income, her daily routines, everything she had built during the years she had been invisible to him. But something stopped his hand every time he reached for the phone. The look on her face when she saw him. Not fear, though that came later. Recognition first. And then something harder. Something that looked like contempt mixed with exhaustion. The expression of someone who had hoped a particular ghost would stay buried and was disappointed but not surprised to see it walking around in an expensive suit. She had turned away from him without hesitation. Gathered the children like a mother hen sensing a predator. Walked away with her spine straight and her shoulders squared and her entire body communicating that he was not welcome in whatever life she had constructed from the wreckage he created. Victor pressed his forehead against the cold glass and felt something crack inside his chest. Not regret. Not yet. Something more primitive. The animal recognition that he had made a mistake so large it might never be corrected. 3 children. He had 3 children. And they did not know he existed. The investigator's report arrived 4 days later. Comprehensive and clinical in its detail. Exactly the kind of document Victor was accustomed to receiving about acquisition targets and competitive threats. Nora Tierney. Age 32. Residing in a rented cottage in Hartwell, Maine. Population 3,000. Operating a freelance editing business from her home with annual revenue sufficient for modest comfort but nothing approaching luxury. The cottage belonged to her aunt, Ida Tierney, age 64, employed at a local care facility. The 2 women shared childcare responsibilities and household expenses. The children were named Owen, Maeve, and Finn. Born premature at 7 months. No father listed on any of the birth certificates. No child support received. No legal claims filed against anyone. Photographs accompanied the report. The investigator had been thorough in documenting their routines. The children at a playground. At the beach. At a farmer's market where Nora was purchasing vegetables while the smallest boy clutched her hand like he might float away if he let go. Victor studied each image with an intensity that would have disturbed him if he had been capable of self-observation at that moment. He searched their faces for himself and found pieces everywhere. Owen had his jawline and his habit of standing with his weight slightly forward, as if preparing to charge at something. Maeve had his mother's eyes, those same observant depths that seemed to be cataloguing everything they saw. Finn had his smile, or at least the smile Victor remembered having before he learned that smiling was a vulnerability that could be exploited. 3 years of birthdays. 3 years of first words and first steps and first everything. Milestones he could never recover no matter how much money he threw at the problem. He had done this to himself. He had made the choice that led directly to this absence. And now he had to decide what to do about it. The rational part of his mind counseled caution. Legal complications. Public relations concerns. The potential impact on Renault Maritime if the media discovered he had fathered and abandoned triplets with a woman who was not his wife. But there was another part of his mind now. A part that had been awakened by those 3 faces on the sidewalk. A part that whispered words like father and family and all the things you are missing while you sit in your empty penthouse counting money that means nothing. Victor booked a flight to Maine. The town of Hartwell was exactly the kind of place Victor had spent his life avoiding. Small and weathered and completely unconcerned with impressing anyone. The houses were practical rather than beautiful. The people dressed for comfort rather than status. The single main street contained a hardware store, a grocery, a diner, and 3 churches, but not a single establishment that would recognize his name or care about his net worth. He checked into the only inn, a converted Victorian that smelled like lavender and old wood. The owner was a woman in her 70s who asked no questions beyond how many nights and whether he preferred a view of the harbor or the garden. Harbor, Victor said, though he did not care about views. He cared about the cottage 3 blocks from the water where Nora Tierney was raising his children without him. He found them the next morning. At the beach. The children running in the surf while Nora sat on a blanket watching them with the focused attention of someone who had learned that disaster could arrive without warning. Victor stood at a distance, partially hidden by a cluster of beach grass, watching like a man dying of thirst watches water he cannot reach. Owen was building something in the wet sand, directing his siblings with gestures that suggested strong opinions about proper construction techniques. Maeve was collecting shells, examining each one before deciding whether it met her standards for preservation. Finn was running in and out of the waves, shrieking with joy every time the water caught his ankles. They were beautiful. Perfect in their chaos. Full of life he had tried to prevent from existing. Nora spotted him before he was ready to be spotted. Her body went rigid in a way he remembered from that night in his office. The moment before she decided whether to fight or flee. She rose from the blanket and moved toward the children with deliberate speed, positioning herself between them and the strange man watching from the dunes. Victor stepped forward because he could not stop himself. Because hiding felt cowardly and he was trying to be something other than the man who had handed her a check and told her to make a problem disappear. Nora. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Please. I just want to talk. She gathered Owen's hand and called for Maeve and Finn to come close. The children obeyed with the instant responsiveness of kids who had learned their mother's serious voice meant something important. You need to leave. Nora's tone was ice. You have no right to be here. No right to watch them. No right to anything. I know. Victor held up his hands, the universal gesture of surrender. I know I have no rights. I gave up any rights I might have had 3 years ago. But I am asking anyway. Please let me explain. Explain what? That you made a mistake. That you changed your mind. That suddenly you have decided you want to be a father after you told me to get rid of them like they were trash. The words hit him like physical blows. He absorbed them because he deserved them and because fighting back would only prove her right about who he was. I was wrong. The admission cost him something, carved from a place that had never learned how to apologize. I was scared and stupid and I said things that I cannot take back. But I am here now. I am trying to be better. Nora laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Trying to be better. You appear in our town without warning, you stalk us to a beach, and you call that trying to be better. You have not changed at all, Victor. You still think you can show up and take whatever you want because you have always gotten whatever you want. Owen tugged at her hand, his small face confused and concerned. Mama, who is this man? Why is he making you upset? Nobody important. Nora's voice softened for her son even as her eyes remained hard on Victor. Just someone who got lost and needs to find his way home. She turned away, leading the children up the beach toward the path that would take them away from him. Victor watched them go and felt something tear inside his chest that he had not known existed until it was damaged beyond repair. He should have left then. should have returned to Boston and his empty life and accepted that some mistakes could not be corrected no matter how badly you wanted to correct them. But Victor Renault had been raised to fight for what he wanted. And he wanted this more than he had ever wanted anything his money could buy. The campaign began the next day. Victor appeared at the grocery store while Nora was shopping, offering to help carry bags she had not asked him to carry. He showed up at the library during story time, sitting in the back and watching the children listen to tales about dragons and princesses. He walked past the cottage every morning and every evening, visible but not approaching, present in a way that communicated his refusal to simply disappear. Nora confronted him after the 5th day, finding him on a bench near the playground where Owen was climbing higher than he should and Maeve was drawing in the sand and Finn was following other children around hoping they would want to be friends. "This is harassment." Her voice was low so the children would not hear. "You are stalking us. I will call the police if you do not leave. I am in public places." Victor had practiced this response with the same care he brought to contract negotiations. "I am not approaching the children without permission. I am not threatening anyone. I am simply existing in the same town where my children live. They are not your children." The words came out fierce and fast. "Biology does not make you a parent. You are nothing to them. Nothing." Victor absorbed this too. Absorbed everything she threw at him because he understood he had earned every blow. "Let me try." His voice cracked on the words in a way that surprised them both. "Let me prove I can be different. Let me show you I am not the man who hurt you. You cannot prove anything because there is nothing to prove." Nora's eyes were wet but her voice remained steady. "You made your choice 3 years ago. You chose your company and your merger and your suitable wife over 3 heartbeats you called a complication. You do not get to change your mind now because you are bored or lonely or having some crisis about meaning. It is not about crisis." Victor stepped closer and she stepped back. "It is about them. About seeing Owen's determination and Maeve's creativity and Finn's kindness and knowing I helped create something beautiful and walked away from it. Let me try, Nora. Let me prove I can be what they need." The sincerity in his voice was almost convincing. Almost enough to crack the walls she had spent 3 years reinforcing. But Nora had survived by trusting her instincts, and every instinct she possessed was screaming that letting Victor into their lives would end in devastation. "No." She gathered the children and began walking away. "Go back to your wife and your company and your empty life. We do not need you. We have never needed you." But Victor kept coming back. Kept showing up. Kept pushing against her boundaries with the relentless determination of someone who had never been told no and actually accepted it. He brought toys the children were too young to appreciate fully. Offered to pay for things Nora explicitly refused. Talked about opportunities his money could provide while completely missing that they did not need his wealth. They needed stability. They needed consistency. They needed someone who would stay. Ida watched this campaign with troubled eyes, observing both Victor's desperation and Nora's rigid fury, wondering if stubbornness was serving anyone or just satisfying old wounds. "He is trying." Ida said it one evening after the children were asleep. "I am not saying forgive him. I am not saying trust him. But maybe let him prove himself before you shut the door completely. He will leave again." Nora's voice was flat with certainty. "He will realize how hard this actually is, how boring and exhausting and thankless parenting can be, and he will run back to his penthouse and his important meetings. I am protecting them from that disappointment. Or you are punishing him by using them as shields." Ida's words were gentle but sharp. "I see what he did to you. I see the damage. But those children deserve to know their father if he is genuinely trying to be present. That is their right even if it terrifies you." Nora wanted to argue but doubt had begun creeping into her certainty. Small questions about whether her protection was actually fear wearing a different costume. Whether keeping Victor away served her children or just satisfied her need for control over a situation that had once controlled her completely. The breaking point came without warning. Victor had been in Hartwell for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of showing up and being rejected. 3 weeks of watching from distances and being told to stay away. 3 weeks of slow erosion wearing away his patience and revealing the man underneath the reformed exterior. Nora told him to leave permanently. Used words designed to wound because wounded men retreated. Called him pathetic and delusional and everything she knew would cut deepest. Victor's mask finally cracked. "I have rights." His voice went cold in a way she remembered from that night in his office. The night he handed her a check and told her to make 3 heartbeats disappear. I am their biological father. I can demand paternity tests. I can force custody arrangements. I can make your life very difficult through legal channels you cannot afford to fight. The threat hung in the air between them, proving everything she had believed about him. There it is. Nora's voice was quiet now, satisfied in a horrible way. The real Victor Renault. Threatening to take what you want because you have never learned how to accept not getting something. This is why I said no. Because I knew the mask would fall eventually. Victor's face crumbled. Horror replacing anger as he heard his own words echoing back at him. Heard his father's voice coming from his own mouth. Saw himself becoming exactly what he had claimed he was trying to escape. I did not mean that. His voice was desperate now, pleading. I am terrified of losing them. Of losing this chance. Please, Nora. I will do anything. You just proved you will do anything. Her response was ice. Including threatening to use your wealth and power against me and my children. Our children. Who you still see as possessions to be acquired rather than people to be loved. Leave, Victor. Leave and do not come back. If I see you in this town again, I will file for a restraining order and spend every penny I have fighting you in court. She walked away and did not look back. Victor stood alone on the sidewalk while the life he had briefly glimpsed receded beyond his reach. He drove back to Boston that night. Not because he had given up, but because he finally understood that showing up was not the same thing as deserving to be let in. The following months destroyed everything Victor had constructed his life around. Genevieve asked for a divorce over breakfast on a Tuesday morning. She delivered the news with the same efficient detachment she brought to gallery acquisitions. She had found someone else. Someone who actually looked at her when she spoke. Someone capable of being present in a room instead of perpetually distracted by the next deal. Victor signed the papers without negotiation. Gave her whatever she asked for because he realized he felt nothing about the ending. Not relief. Not grief. Nothing at all. This absence of feeling disturbed him more than any feeling would have. His father died 3 weeks later. Massive heart attack in his office, surrounded by documents and contracts and the physical evidence of a life spent accumulating wealth that meant nothing now that his heart had stopped beating. The funeral was elaborate and well attended by people who respected the Renault name without particularly caring about the man who had carried it. Victor stood at the graveside and waited for grief to arrive. It never did. Just a hollow recognition that he had spent his entire life chasing the approval of someone incapable of giving it. His mother approached him after the other mourners had drifted toward their cars. Colette looked older than he remembered, fragile in a way she had hidden while her husband was alive. He is gone now. Her voice carried neither grief nor relief, just acknowledgement of fact. And you are still here. Still alive. Still capable of choosing something different than what he programmed into you. Victor looked at the fresh earth covering his father's casket. I do not know how to choose something different. I only know how to be what he made me. Then learn. Colette touched his face with a tenderness she had rarely shown when he was young. Before it is too late. Before you end up in a hole like this one, surrounded by people who respected your bank account and never knew your heart. She walked away toward the waiting car, leaving Victor alone with his father's grave and the dawning recognition that he was becoming exactly what Nora had accused him of being. A man incapable of change. A man who would die alone having accumulated everything except what actually mattered. That night Victor sat in his empty penthouse and made a decision that would alter the course of his remaining years. He stepped back from Renault Maritime. Installed trusted executives to manage daily operations. Removed himself from the endless cycle of meetings and negotiations and deals that had filled his calendar for 2 decades. He sold the penthouse. Bought a modest apartment. Gave away most of his possessions because they had never been anything more than props in a performance he no longer wanted to continue. He started therapy. Not the kind his father would have mocked as weakness for people without self-control. Real therapy with a real professional who made him examine the foundations of who he had become and why. The sessions were brutal. Excavating layers of conditioning he had never questioned. His father's voice telling him that emotion was liability and vulnerability was weakness. His mother's silence teaching him that love meant accepting mistreatment without complaint. his own choices reinforcing patterns that had been carved into him before he was old enough to resist. He wrote letters he would never send. To Nora. To the children. To his dead father. To the boy he had been before the machinery of expectation crushed whatever softness had existed in him. He did not contact Maine. Did not hire investigators to track Nora's movements. Did not attempt to insert himself into lives he had forfeited the right to touch. He simply worked. On himself. On becoming someone worthy of the second chance he might never receive. Months passed in silence. Victor existing in his smaller life, doing his therapeutic homework, learning that transformation was not a destination but a daily practice of choosing differently than you had been taught to choose. He did not know if Nora would ever open the door again. He chose to change anyway. Because the alternative was becoming his father completely. And that was a fate worse than anything else he could imagine. The letter arrived on a grey afternoon in early spring. Handwritten on plain paper without return address, though Victor knew immediately who had sent it. He opened it with hands that trembled slightly, unaccustomed to the physical symptoms of hope mixed with terror. Your mother came to see me. The words were Nora's, practical and direct without decoration. She told me what you have been doing. The therapy. The changes. The work on yourself that has nothing to do with us. I do not forgive you. I may never forgive you. But I am tired of carrying anger like a second heartbeat. And the children ask questions I cannot answer without acknowledging that their father exists somewhere in the world. If you want to try again, these are my conditions. They are not negotiable. Supervised visits only. I will be present at all times. You will follow my rules absolutely. No gifts without explicit permission. No promises to the children that I have not approved. No discussions of money or what you can provide. You may come twice monthly. If you violate any condition, even once, you will be gone permanently. No second chances on this second chance. If you agree, be at the cottage on the first Saturday of next month. 10 in the morning. Bring nothing but yourself. Victor read the letter 3 times. Then he sat down at his small desk in his modest apartment and wrote his response. 3 words. All he could trust himself to say without overwhelming her with gratitude and promises he might not be able to keep. I will come. The first visit was excruciating for everyone involved. Victor arrived exactly at 10, dressed simply, carrying nothing. He had shaved that morning with hands that shook so badly he cut himself twice. The small wounds were still visible on his jaw when Nora opened the door. She looked at him without warmth but also without the hatred he had seen on the beach. Something had shifted in the months of his absence. Not softening exactly. More like exhaustion. The tired recognition that some battles were not worth fighting forever. Come in. She stepped aside to let him enter. The children are in the living room. They know a man is coming to visit. They do not know who you are or why you are here. That information will come later if you earn it. The cottage was small and worn and filled with evidence of life being lived fully. Drawings on the refrigerator. Toys scattered across the floor. Photographs on every surface showing 3 children at various ages, documenting milestones Victor had missed entirely. Owen looked up first when Victor entered the living room. The boy's expression was suspicious and assessing, cataloguing this stranger with the instinct of someone who had appointed himself protector of his family. Mama said you want to know us. Owen's voice carried challenge. Why did you not want to know us before? The question hit Victor like a blow to the chest. He looked at Nora and saw no rescue coming. This was his test and he had to take it alone. He lowered himself to the floor, bringing his eyes level with Owen's. The position felt strange after a lifetime of standing above others, using height as advantage. I made a terrible mistake. Victor chose each word carefully, aware that children could sense dishonesty the way animals sense predators. I was scared of being a father because I thought I would not be good at it. I was wrong to let fear make my decisions. Are you still scared? Owen's eyes were relentless, demanding truth rather than comfort. Terrified. Victor's honesty seemed to satisfy something in the boy. But I am trying anyway. Sometimes the right thing is also the scary thing. Owen considered this for a long moment. Then he nodded once, apparently accepting the answer as sufficient for now. He returned to the wooden blocks he had been stacking, though Victor noticed he kept glancing over periodically to assess whether the strange man was behaving appropriately. Maeve ignored Victor completely. She sat in a corner with her sketchbook, drawing something with fierce concentration. Occasionally she looked up to study him the way an artist studies a subject, cataloguing details without engaging emotionally. Finn was the one who broke the standoff. 20 minutes into the visit, while Victor sat awkwardly on the couch where Nora had directed him, the smallest child climbed into his lap without warning. Just crawled up and settled there like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Do you want to see my shells?" Finn's voice was high and sweet and completely trusting. "I have a collection. They all have names." Victor looked at Nora, uncertain whether this was permitted. She nodded almost imperceptibly, her expression unreadable. "I would like that very much." Victor's voice came out rough. Finn's weight on his lap felt foreign and precious and terrifying all at once. The boy launched into an elaborate explanation of his shell collection, assigning personalities and backstories to each one with the creativity of someone who had not yet learned that imagination had limits. Victor listened with an intensity that had nothing to do with shells and everything to do with drinking in every detail of this person he had helped create. Something cracked open in his chest while Finn talked. Something that had been sealed shut for so long he had forgotten it existed. The feeling was uncomfortable and wonderful, and he did not want it to stop. The visits continued. Weekly, then twice weekly as the children warmed incrementally. Owen remained the hardest to reach. He tested Victor constantly, asking questions designed to reveal weakness or dishonesty. He remembered every promise and pointed out every failure to keep one. He trusted slowly and grudgingly, making Victor work for every small moment of acceptance. Maeve was different. She required quiet and patience and the willingness to exist in her space without demanding attention. Victor learned to sit near her while she drew, offering comments only when invited, allowing her to set the pace of their connection. One afternoon she handed him a drawing without explanation. A family portrait showing 5 figures. Nora and Victor and all 3 children, standing in front of a house that looked like the cottage. Evidence that she had already imagined him into their future even if she had not spoken the words. Victor hung it in his apartment with the reverence usually reserved for museum pieces. Finn was the easiest and the hardest. Easiest because he gave love freely and without conditions. Hardest because his trust felt like something fragile that could shatter if Victor made a single wrong move. The boy attached immediately and completely, following Victor around during visits, demanding to be picked up, sharing every thought that crossed his mind without filter or hesitation. His vulnerability terrified Victor in ways Owen's suspicion never could. Victor made mistakes constantly. He bribed with treats when he should have been firm. He said yes to everything because he was terrified of them not liking him. He panicked during tantrums and made them worse. He had no instinct for any of this, no internal compass pointing toward the right response. Nora corrected him sharply when he failed. She did not spare his feelings or soften her criticism. He accepted every correction without defensiveness because he understood that her harshness was the price of admission. Ida began warming toward him gradually, offering grudging advice about bedtime routines and preferred snacks and the particular ways each child needed to be soothed. She remained suspicious but no longer openly hostile. Progress measured in millimeters. Months passed. Victor never missed a visit. Never overstepped the boundaries Nora established. Never reverted to the threatening man who had emerged on that sidewalk when his patience ran out. He learned that Owen required logical explanations and would respect honesty even when it was uncomfortable. He learned that Maeve responded to art supplies and quiet presence. He learned that Finn needed constant reassurance but gave love so generously that the investment always paid returns. Nora watched this transformation and waited for it to prove false. Waited for the moment when Victor would realize how hard parenting actually was and retreat to easier options. But the moment never came. He kept showing up. Kept trying. Kept choosing them even when visits were boring or exhausting or thankless. His mother Colette visited monthly. The children called her Grandmere within weeks, accepting her with the easy generosity of people who had not yet learned to be suspicious of love. She taught them French phrases and brought picture books from Paris and showered them with attention while respecting every boundary Nora established. She apologized repeatedly for the family Victor had come from. For the father who taught him that emotion was weakness. For her own failure to protect him from that teaching. "I was afraid of him," Colette admitted this to Nora one afternoon while the children played in the garden and Victor read to Finn on the porch. I let my fear make me complicit in what he did to our son. I cannot undo that damage. But I can try to be present now. For them and for you. Nora found herself warming to this woman who had every reason to reject her mixed-race grandchildren, but instead embraced them completely. Who had defied her husband's memory to claim this unconventional family as her own. Something was shifting. Slowly and reluctantly but undeniably. The walls Nora had built to protect herself and her children were developing cracks that let in light and possibility and terrifying hope. The crisis came on a night that began like any other. Maeve spiked a fever that climbed so fast Nora barely had time to panic before they were rushing to the hospital. The child's small body burned like it was trying to consume itself from the inside. Her eyes were unfocused. Her breathing shallow. Seizure in the car on the way. Her body jerking in ways that would haunt Nora's dreams for years to come. Ida was away visiting a friend in Portland. There was no one to watch Owen and Finn while Nora stayed at Maeve's bedside. Except Victor. She called him at 2 a.m. with her voice cracking and her hands shaking and her world narrowing to the single point of her daughter's survival. I need help. The words cost her everything. Pride and suspicion and 3 years of proving she did not need anyone. Maeve is in the hospital. Owen and Finn are alone at the cottage. I cannot leave her. Please, Victor. He arrived in 4 hours, having driven through the night from the city where he now lived. He did not ask questions. Did not require explanations. Simply walked into the cottage and gathered the frightened children and told them everything would be okay. The crisis stretched 3 days. Maeve had contracted an aggressive infection that required 4 antibiotics and constant monitoring. The doctors were cautiously optimistic but would not make promises. Victor slept on Nora's couch. Made imperfect breakfasts for Owen and Finn. Read bedtime stories in voices that made them giggle despite everything. Held them when they cried for their sister and their mother. Managed tantrums and fears and all the chaos of 2 children whose world had suddenly become frightening. He had no idea what he was doing. But he did it anyway. Because they needed him and that was enough. When Nora finally came home with Maeve weak but recovering, she found her house intact and her son's calm and evidence everywhere of genuine care rather than performative competence. Victor was washing dishes at the sink. His expensive clothes wrinkled and stained with the evidence of childcare. His face exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with business negotiations or deals closed under pressure. She stood in the doorway watching him for a long moment before he noticed her presence. Thank you. The words came out soft. Almost tender in a way she had not allowed herself to be with him since before the triplets existed. Thank you for being here. Victor turned off the water and faced her. Dark circles under his eyes. His hair uncombed for days. Looking nothing like the polished executive who had handed her a check and told her to make 3 lives disappear. I would not be anywhere else. His voice was rough with exhaustion and something deeper. They are my children too. Finally. Really. For the first time. Something shifted between them in that kitchen. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Perhaps not ever fully. But acknowledgement of a change so fundamental that denying it would require willful blindness. She nodded once. Then went to check on Maeve, leaving Victor at the sink with his wrinkled clothes and his evidence of caring and the small quiet revolution happening inside both of them. The months that followed were different. Victor moved permanently to Maine. Rented a small house near the cottage. Established a consulting practice that kept him comfortable without consuming his life. The children began calling him Papa. A choice they made themselves, not something anyone requested or required. Owen started seeking his advice on problems at school. Maeve began showing him her drawings before showing anyone else. Finn climbed into his lap automatically whenever they were in the same room. Nora found herself trusting Victor with solo time. Allowing him to pick the children up from school. Letting him make decisions about their lives without requiring prior approval for each one. They became partners in a way she had never imagined possible with a man who had tried to erase their children from existence. Coordinating schedules. Dividing responsibilities. Building something together that neither could have built alone. And underneath it all, underneath the practical cooperation and the shared parenting and the gradual melting of old wounds, something else was growing. Nora noticed herself watching for him. Looking forward to his arrival. feeling his absence when he was not there. The recognition terrified her. She had rebuilt her life around not needing Victor Renault, around proving that she could survive and thrive without anything he had to offer. Falling in love with who he had become felt like a betrayal of the woman who had walked away from him in the rain. But the heart does not take instruction, and hers was opening despite every wall she had constructed to keep it safe. Victor noticed too. He noticed and he waited, unwilling to push, terrified of destroying what he had spent 2 years earning through patience and consistency and daily demonstration that he was not the man who had hurt her. The conversation finally happened on an evening so ordinary it became extraordinary through contrast. The children were in bed. Dishes were washed. The cottage was quiet in the way it only became when 3 small people were finally sleeping. Victor and Nora sat on the porch watching stars emerge above the ocean and feeling the weight of everything unsaid between them. "Why did you do it?" Nora's voice was soft but steady. The question she had never asked because asking meant caring about the answer. "Why did you try to make them disappear?" Victor was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw in a way she had never heard from him. "I was terrified. Not of fatherhood specifically. Of everything it meant. Of choosing something real over something expected. Of disappointing my father more than I already had. Of admitting that I wanted more than the life I had been designed to live." He stared at his hands, unable to meet her eyes. "I told myself I was being practical, protecting my family name, honoring my commitments. But the truth is that I was a coward. I was scared of loving something I could not control. So I tried to make it not exist. Because if it did not exist, I would not have to face what it revealed about me." What did it reveal? Nora's question was barely a whisper. That I was capable of destroying beautiful things to avoid feeling afraid. That I had been trained so completely by my father that I did not even recognize the cage I was living in. That I did not know how to love without conditions or limitations or the constant assessment of value. He finally raised his eyes to meet hers. "I cannot undo what I did. I cannot give you back the years when you should have had a partner. I cannot give them back a father who was present from the beginning. All I can do is be here now. Every day. Choosing you. Choosing them. Proving through time and consistency that I am not the man who handed you that check." Nora studied his face in the starlight, searching for the traces of the man she had loved and lost. Finding someone new instead. Someone carved by suffering into a shape capable of holding love without trying to control it. "I believe you have changed." The words came slowly, each one carefully chosen. "I believe you are trying to be what they need. I believe you love them in a way that surprises even you." She paused. Let the silence stretch. "I do not forgive you. Not completely. Maybe not ever fully. But I am tired of letting what happened define what happens next." She reached across the space between them and took his hand. A gesture so simple it should not have felt revolutionary. But it was. "I want to try." Her voice broke on the last word. "Not because you showed up. Not because the children love you. Because I see who you are becoming and I want to know that person better." Victor's hand trembled in hers. His eyes were wet in a way he would not have allowed 3 years ago. Would not have been capable of 3 years ago. "I have loved you since before I knew how to love." His confession was simple and enormous. "Let me spend the rest of my life proving I am worthy of it." They kissed on that porch while the stars wheeled overhead and the ocean whispered against the shore. It was not the desperate passion of their early relationship. It was something steadier. Something earned through years of separation and grief and the slow patient work of becoming worthy of second chances. When they finally drew apart, Nora was crying. Not from sadness. From the overwhelming relief of finally setting down a burden she had carried so long she forgot it had weight. One day at a time. Her voice was steady despite the tears. "You prove yourself every day and I let you a little further in each time. That is how this works. That is the only way it works. I can do that." Victor pressed his forehead against hers. "I can do anything if it means getting to stay." They sat together until the stars began to fade and the first hints of dawn touched the horizon. Not speaking. Just existing in the same space. Letting the silence say what words could not. Inside the cottage 3 children slept peacefully. unaware that the world had shifted while they dreamed, unaware that the man they called Papa had finally become something worthy of the name. The proposal came 6 months later. Not in a restaurant. Not with witnesses. Just Victor on one knee in the kitchen after a chaotic dinner, surrounded by the mess of raising 3 children and absolutely certain he had never wanted anything more in his life. Owen rolled his eyes and said finally in a way that made everyone laugh. Maeve began planning what she would draw for the wedding. Finn demanded to know if this meant Victor would live with them forever. Nora looked at the man kneeling before her. At the ring that was beautiful but not ostentatious. At the face that had learned to soften. At the hands that had learned to hold gently things they once would have crushed. She said yes. The wedding was small. Just family and close friends on the beach where Victor had first found them after his return to Maine. Ida officiated, having gotten ordained online for the occasion. Colette wept through the entire ceremony. The triplets served as ring bearers and flower children, losing the rings and scattering petals chaotically and making everything perfect through their imperfection. Victor adopted all 3 children legally. The papers signed. The birth certificates amended. Owen, Maeve, and Finn Renault. 3 children born from betrayal who had become proof that transformation was possible. That forgiveness could heal wounds that should have been fatal. Years passed. The triplets grew. Owen became the leader they always knew he would be. Maeve's art began winning prizes and attracting attention. Finn's sensitivity developed into empathy that drew people to him like moths to gentle flame. Victor never missed a school event. Never prioritized work over presents. Never forgot the man he had been or the daily choice required to remain the man he had become. Nora kept her editing business. Kept her independence. Kept the part of herself that had survived when he tried to break her. They built their marriage on foundation of truth about what had happened, not comfortable lies about who they had always been. On the morning of the triplets' 8th birthday, Nora stood at the kitchen window watching Victor walk them to the beach for a celebration that would involve cake and swimming and the chaos that always accompanied their family. She remembered the check on the glass table. The cold command to get rid of it. The rain soaking through her coat while she walked away from the life she thought she wanted. She felt neither anger nor triumph. Just quiet satisfaction. The recognition that choosing courage when everything told her to choose fear had led to this morning. To those 3 children laughing on the beach. To the man who had become worthy of them through years of patient proving. Her hand pressed against the window glass. Warm from sunlight. Solid and present and real. This was enough. This had always been enough. The love we are willing to fight for. The transformation we are willing to earn. The second chances we grant not because they are deserved but because we choose hope over the comfortable certainty of anger. Victor looked up from the beach and saw her watching. He raised his hand. She raised hers back. Between them, on sand that stretched golden toward water that sparkled like scattered diamonds, 3 children played with the complete freedom of people who had never doubted they were wanted. 3 heartbeats he had tried to erase. 3 lives that had saved them both.